Okay, so this video portion is hopefully going to help explain the role play and remind you of what it represented when we did it in class. This is actually for the electron transport chain in the mitochondria, so during cellular respiration. So first of all, we have a couple of differences from the one with that involve photosynthesis. First of all, there's no sun because the mitochondria don't undergo photosynthesis. They can't do anything with the energy from the sun. So we have a different way of getting those high energy electrons to the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain in this case is in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. That's why it's all folded up, so there's lots more space available, lots more surface area available for this to happen. So in this case, the electron, the way that the electrons get to the electron transport chain is by being carried in these molecules. So NADH and FADH2 are electron carrier molecules that are formed during earlier steps in cellular respiration. So there's a lot formed during the Krebs cycle or citric acid cycle, and there's some formed in the earlier steps as well. And they sometimes getting them in from the cytoplasm, like from glycolysis, is a little more complicated, but we're not going to get into that for this level. So we just want to talk about the main gist of what happens. So basically, NADH would carry the electrons to the first complex or electron carrier complex in the membrane, and the electrons would again be passed along to the other electron complex in the membrane. The bench, again in this role play, is representing the membrane, but this time it's not the membrane, the thylakoid membrane, it's the membrane in the inner membrane in the mitochondria. Again, you'll see ATP synthase, so that's the enzyme that's going to produce ATP. But the final electron carrier that drives the electron transport chain in the mitochondrion is oxygen. So this is the whole reason why we need to breathe in oxygen. If we didn't have oxygen, we wouldn't have enough energy. We wouldn't have enough ATP being made in our cells to even be able to function. So we'll take a look at it a little closer here. Wow, that's a lot of arrows, right? Okay, so let's look first what happens with NADH. The NADH carries electrons to that first electron carrier, and as the electrons are passed down to the next complexes or next carriers, a little bit of energy is given off at each step, and that powers the transfer of hydrogen ions across the membrane. Okay, so same principle as with the electron transport chain in the light reactions. Okay, we get hydrogen ions across. It establishes a hydrogen ion gradient so that the hydrogen ions can go back through ATP synthase, and then ADP and phosphate can be joined to form ATP. That is the whole job of this enzyme. Okay, so when NADH passes its electrons on, it passes them to the first complex or first carriers, and so we get a higher amount of hydrogen ions and ultimately a higher amount of ATP. So for every NADH that passes electrons on, we get 3 ATP. FADH2, on the other hand, bypasses the first electron carrier, electron carrier complex, we'll call it, and it gives its electrons to the second one. So because it can only give to the second, which passes it on to the third, then less hydrogen ions would be pumped across from transferring those electrons. Okay, so for every FADH2 that takes electrons to the electron transport chain, we get 2 ATP being produced. So again, the last part in the electron transport chain, or the electron acceptor, the final acceptor that kind of drives the whole thing for happening, is oxygen. And when it accepts those electrons, it also accepts hydrogens, because the hydrogens kind of follow the electrons around too. So if you think oxygen and hydrogens, we get water. So that is how water ends up being produced from cellular respiration. So the goal of the light reactions was to generate ATP and NADPH, but only to make the dark reactions happen in photosynthesis. For cell respiration, on the other hand, the whole goal is for us to be able to get ATP, energy for our cells to do what they need to do. So we need to get lots of it. And that's it.